If you're recording live drums in GarageBand, you need to be editing them. It's one of the most important steps in the recording process, but unfortunately it's also one of the most skipped steps. If you want your drums and ultimately your song to sound professional, you need to be editing your drums. So in today's video, I'm going to walk you through 2 levels of drum editing like a pro in GarageBand. Welcome back to the Band Guide. I'm your band guy, Colin, and before we get into today's video, there's 5 quick things you need to know. First, you need to match the style of your song with your drum editing. So really technical rock songs sometimes need to be perfectly edited to the grid. And some songs, if you're going to have a bunch of loops that are perfectly quantized to the grid, then you might want your drums to be perfectly quantized to the grid as well. But some other styles like classic rock or alt rock or singer-songwriters, things like that, you might not actually need to edit perfectly to the grid. We'll look at that actually when we get into this, and I'm going to show you an approach for both in this video. Those are the 2 levels. The second thing you need to know is that in order to do this, at least the way we're going to be going over it in this video today, the drums have to be recorded to a metronome or click track. And the drummer has to be reasonably in time with that metronome. There's no way to edit it if it's too far off beat. There's no way to get it back on beat if the drum is just too loose relative to the timing of the song. The third thing you need to know is that if you've recorded your drums with more than one microphone, which is common with drums, you might have a kick mic and a snare mic and tom mics and overheads and room mics, a whole bunch of mics. But even if you just use 2 mics, you can't use flex time to edit the drums. But that's okay because I actually don't recommend you use flex time anyway editing drums. It can kind of mess with the transients and you lose some impact. But the reason for this is that flex time in GarageBand is going to move one track at a time. So your kick might move differently than your snare, but all the mics hear each other at the same time, so they have to be moved perfectly together. So you cannot use flex time if you've used more than one microphone on the drum kit. But that's okay because generally I don't recommend flex time for editing drums anyway, and the way I'm going to teach you to edit in this video doesn't need flex time at all. Fourth, the best time to edit drums is actually before you record everything else, and that's because if you get your drums really tight with their timing, then everything you record on top of that is naturally going to be a little bit tighter in timing. If you edit the drums after you have recorded all the parts, then everything's going to be a little bit looser because the drums were a little bit looser, then you record the guitars to the drums that are a little bit loose, and then they're going to be a little bit looser. So get your drums tight first, then start laying your bass and your guitars and your other elements on top of that. And fifth and final, while editing drums in GarageBand is definitely possible, and we're going to be going over how to do that in today's video, Logic does have a lot of time-saving features for editing drums. This is one of the few areas that I say if you're going to be recording a lot of live drums, especially if you need them tightly edited, like in a heavy rock song or just anything where it needs to be perfectly edited, then Logic is going to save you so much time in just the editing and mixing of those drums that it will be worth the investment, I promise. Logic is not necessary for everybody, and you can get this done in GarageBand. I'm going to show you how, but for some people, it's just going to be worth it. Okay, let's go ahead and get into today's video looking at the 2 levels of drum editing. Okay, before we get into the 2 levels of drum editing, there's 2 things you need to know. So 2 things to know, 2 levels, really easy. Okay, the first is where is the grid and what you're seeing with the grid. So the grid in GarageBand and in Logic actually is right up here at the top of your session. And this is just showing us the divisions of our song, right? So this song's in 4/4, it's 150 beats per minute. So we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. We see those grid points, right? Does that remind you of like band class in middle school or high school or whatever, or when you're taking piano lessons as a kid? Anyway, so that's what we're looking at with the grid here. And as we zoom in, we're going to see more and more divisions. So we'll see 8th notes and 32nd notes and 64th notes, and it will get crazy until we're seeing like 1,064th notes. I don't know if that even is a thing, but you see a whole bunch of little delineations. So what's important is to know that you're going to be zooming in and out a fair amount to be making sure that you're seeing the right division, if you will. So while we're looking at it right here, this is the downbeat, and then we see over here 90.2 is the second beat. So this is 1, 2 over here. That means right here we have the 8th note in between. And then we have 3 over here, we have the 8th note in between, and we in between those have our 16th note. So we can now kind of gauge that, and I can zoom out and see just what I want to see. If I zoom out a little bit more, then I see less divisions, right? It makes it easier. So zooming in and out, I do this with my trackpad, just pinching in and out. If you have a mouse, you can probably scroll up and down. I think there's a key command for that. If you know it, let me know in the comments below. But I'm a trackpad guy. Even when I'm working with a desktop, I got the Magic Trackpad. Highly recommend it. I think it's easier to move around in a session with it. So I can zoom in, I can zoom out, and that's going to help us see what's going on with the grid and know exactly where we are relative to the nearest division. And then the second thing you need to know is how to read waveforms. So waveforms are just your recorded audio. And here what we see is the transients of the drums. What's great about drums and what makes them easier to edit than a lot of other things is they have really distinct transients, really distinct hits, right? So this is my kick drum here, and I can see the exact start of this kick hit. I can zoom in and I can see that is the start of the kick hit right there. If I zoom back out here, I can see on this snare drum, this is the start of this snare drum hit right there, right? So I can see the exact start of something. And that's really important because the whole idea with editing is that we're going to be tightening up the timing to make sure that everything is really in line with the metronome. And then thus, as we add other elements, everything's going to be really in time with each other. So using the grid is very helpful. I know some people feel like you shouldn't edit perfectly to the grid. I'm not necessarily in that boat. Editing the grid is just a guideline, and it's much easier to edit to the grid than always having to look back to where the actual drum hits were. So my preference is to edit to the grid, even if I'm not editing it perfectly. So let's go and get into the two levels. And the first level is a great example of when you don't need to edit it perfectly, when you're just trying to get it a little bit tighter in timing. So I'm going to zoom out here and let's just listen to a little bit of what's going on at this point in the song. Okay. So this is me drumming, so I'm not being critical of another drummer here. By this point in the song, I'm fairly into the song, and I'm just tired. This drum part is exhausting. Going into recording this, I was like, oh, I'm excited to record this song, but I am not excited to be exhausted by it and know that these takes at the end of the song, I'm going to have to really push, stay as close on time as I can. And I'm really dragging here. And so when we talk about seeing waveforms, reading waveforms, I can see that I'm dragging. I can see that I'm behind the beat because I can see my grid right here. And I can see as I go through this little section, this kick drum is supposed to be right here, but it's all the way back here. So I'm behind the beat. I'm dragging on it, right? And that continues as I move through here. So level one editing is to not go into individual hits. It's to focus on larger sections and shift larger sections together. And so the idea here is I'm going to figure out when I started to drag and just shift it forward a little bit. And so to really, you just kind of move around in your session and look for when am I still on the beat, and then go to when do you start to get off the beat. So I start to get off the beat around this hit. So it was a little bit before I even started that section right there. I'm starting to get a little bit behind. But then that hit's pretty on. So you have to spend some time like kind of looking at the different hits and seeing where am I actually off here. But I think I could probably go right around here. And I want to just move this to be a little bit further forward, so I'm shifting it forward. So you'll need to select all of your drum tracks, and then generally speaking with drum editing, you're focusing on your kick drum and your snare drum. So here I have my kick on the top, and then I have my snare right here. If you have really prominent toms or other things, you can look at those as well, but generally it's the kick and snare that you're trying to get really locked into the groove. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to make sure that I find the actual start of this kick hit, and I'm going to hit Command T on the keyboard. That's going to split it right at that point. Again, make sure you have all your tracks selected. And then I'm going to move forward here, and I'm going to see if I get back on the beat. It's pretty common with drummers that they'll get off for a second, they'll get a little bit tired, or the fill will just get them slowly behind or ahead of the beat, and then they'll get back on the beat. So I want to find if I get back on the beat really quick. So we're just going to zoom forward here. And again, I'm just going to kind of move my cursor around, looking at where it is relative to these kick drum hits. So what I'm looking for is when do my kick drum hits get back on the beat? Maybe they never do. Maybe I'm a little bit behind for the rest of the song. My hope is that that's not the case. It looks like I'm pretty on right here. Yeah, okay. So around here, I start to be pretty on again. In fact, I'm even a little bit ahead. Looks like maybe this hit. Yeah, this hit right here. I don't know what it is about that hit, the click, I got that rhythm back. So I'm going to zoom in here, go to the start of that kick drum, and then I'm going to hit Command T. I'm going to zoom back out here, and then I'm going to select this entire section that I know I was just a little bit behind the beat, and I'm going to zoom back in on it, and I'm just going to try to get it where most of my hits are more on the beat than they are right now. So I'm just going to grab it and slide it until my kick drum looks mostly on the beat right here. Check some of these other hits. So I'm just moving my cursor around and looking at where they land relative to the waveform. So some of them are a little bit ahead, but generally speaking, this is more on beat now. So if we listen to this with the metronome on here, so I start to be a little bit behind again right here. So I might need to go in and shift this section be even a little bit further forward. So the idea with level 1 editing is you're just looking at broad strokes, just trying to get it where everything is a little bit closer. The key to this is that the drummer is pretty on time the whole performance. Otherwise, you're going to have to get into more individual hits. With level 1 editing, if the song isn't really technical and or you're not using a bunch of other things that are going to be perfectly quantized to the grid, then you could totally get by with just this type of editing. Level 2, we're going to get a lot more specific, and we're really going to zero in on making sure every hit is happening exactly where it should be. Now, with this actual song, there is a very perfectly rhythmic nature to this part. It's just do do get do 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 get. So it's important to me that it's really locked in. It's almost like a drum machine in some sections of the song. So a song like this, I would actually probably edit almost perfectly, if not perfectly, to the grid. So let's go and look at what level 2 editing actually looks like. Let's go over to another section that I think is really going to showcase level 2 editing well. This section over here, I moved to the crash, and I'm just kind of doing this perfectly do do get rhythm, and it needs to be really in time. It's not bad, but at this point in the song, this is the very end of the song, I'm just a little bit fatigued. My legs dragging on those hits a little bit. So I need to get them tighter, because when it is hitting like do, do, get, do, instead of do, do, get, do, it just makes it feel unprofessional, right? And again, I'm not being mean to a drummer. I'm the drummer here. So I just need to tighten it up a little bit. This is the best performance I could get on the day. Sometimes that's all you can do. It would be better if I could have gotten a perfect take, but that's not always realistic. And getting the best version of the song is ultimately the only thing that I care about. So if I need to tweak my performance a little bit to tighten it up a little bit, I'm totally okay with that. I'll always continue to practice to try to be a better drummer and be better, getting closer on things like my timing, but it's okay. You just got to be okay with where you are in that moment. So let's look at this section here. So first thing right off the bat, we can see this very first hit that should be right on that downbeat is late. So I want to get that first hit right on the downbeat. So we're going to go ahead and go here, zoom in, and find right when the start of that kick drum is. And then I'll hit Command T on the keyboard. And then I'm going to zoom out, and I need to find the end of this section. I tend to work in sections with this type of editing, so it's similar. I'll start with kind of level 1, and I'll get the whole section a little bit closer, but I do this also so that I'm not messing with stuff later in the song that might be closer in timing already without any editing. So I can see this section at least is probably going through here. Yeah, so for now I'm just going to go here, even though I can see that that hit right there is pretty late as well. But you could do it where you're finding until you get back on the beat and just edit up until that point. But for now, we're just going to edit right there. That way I'm only focusing on this little section right here. And now I'm going to zoom in. I've trimmed this first hit. I'm going to go ahead and drag this to where that hit is perfectly on beat. And then I'm going to drag the beginning of this back just a little bit. And then I'm going to go to the start of the second beat. I'm going to trim right at the start of the second beat. Command T. I'm going to zoom out for context again, right? So I can see the right division that I need, which is right here. And I'm going to drag that so it's perfectly on beat. And I'm going to zoom in, pull this back just a little bit, zoom out to find the next hit. It's right around here. Zoom in, it's on the snare drum. We're going to go to the very start of the snare drum here, hit Command T to trim it, zoom out for context. I want that to be perfectly on that beat right there. So I'm just going to drag it back a little bit. See how small that adjustment was? And then I drag this back just a hair so that I'm definitely not cutting into the actual hit of the drum. Since I'm trying to trim as close to that hit as I can, I want to drag it back a little bit to give myself a little bit of margin right there. Let's go to the next hit. I'll go to the start of that hit, go to the very beginning, find where I started that hit, hit Command T, zoom out for context again, and it looks like at this point I might be a little bit ahead, so I need to shift back, but I might have to listen to that to know if that's right. So we're gonna pull this back here and let's listen if that sounds right. Yeah, so that's right timing wise. And then we'll go up to this next hit. It looks like it's a little bit late, so it should be right here. I'm gonna pull this up, go to the very start of that hit, hit Command T to trim, and then drag this back to be perfectly on the beat, zoom back in. So you can see it's not the fastest thing in the world, but when I'm done with this, these drums are going to be perfectly in time with the beat. And then if I add layers that are also perfectly quantized, those are going to hit at exactly the same moments. It's subtle stuff, but the way hits happen when everything's hitting right at the same time, right when they're supposed to be hitting, it feels better, it sounds more professional, and it adds a lot of impact to the track. So perfectly quantizing like this is not necessary for all songs. It's not necessary for all styles. And if you're also just casually making music, maybe you don't need to perfectly quantize like this. But I would encourage you to at least do level 1 editing on your drums. If you've recorded them live, you should do at least level 1 editing so that everything is generally together. All this said, if you're using GarageBand Drummer, then you don't need to worry about this at all because it's perfectly in time with the song already as is. That's one of the huge advantages of GarageBand Drummer. So as we wrap up here, if you made it to the end of this video, I know you're really serious about getting great sounding professional recordings. I want to give you something to help with that. I've put together a 6-step checklist that walks through the same 6 steps that all professional mixers have and how to do them inside GarageBand or wherever else it is that you might be making music. Even if you're mixing live, it's the same 6 steps. And it's completely free from link in the description below, so be sure to pick it up. It's really going to help you out. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you recorded any live drums in GarageBand? And if so, is this going to help you out? Let me know in the comments below. And I'd love to hear which level do you think you'll do? What makes sense to you? Are you going to do level 1 where it's broader scale changes, or you're going to do level 2 that's perfectly accurate and getting every hit right where it should be? Let me know in the comments below. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week. We're going to look at drum editing in Logic.
One thing